if each of the panelists could give a little bit of an introduction of what is your relationship to this topic, what is the work that you have done or are currently doing around this area, and what are some of the questions that you have, some things that you think about, that you find difficult or challenging, or examples of things that you see as the real potential. So again, sticking around this sort of potential or limits, what are some of those things? So Nick, let's start with you.
Okay, so my background in education and games, I come at it from sort of both ways. I've been an educator for, I want to say like 12 or 13 years. I taught English at the collegiate level for about 6 or 7 years before I became a game designer, and I now teach game design and interactive narrative. And I've worked on a number of educational games, both professionally and just as a hobby, including games like some serious games. I was lead designer on a game called IGDANY, The Cost of Life. I also worked on some games for, in my previous role as the director of game design at Game Lab, I worked on IGDANY, The Cost of Life, and a couple other games, and I've also done some hobby games around it. I guess my questions about it from my experiences in that and my personal experiences are, my biggest concern is that education at the subcollegiate level is extremely tied to certain kinds of bureaucracy that are entirely unmoving and locked almost irreparably to certain kinds of metrics that I don't actually think games can deliver on in certain ways. I think there's certain kinds of games learning that happens that's in fact the most important kind of learning that games do that can't be quantified in the systems that we have right now. And so I guess my primary concern going forward is that I think that games teach all the time, and I think that they teach really interesting, important things all the time, but that those are things that are not recognized by the school system, and that trying to shoehorn games into things that are recognized by the school system, yeah, I think is possible, and I think we can do a lot of interesting work with games in that context, but I think it misses a lot of the exploratory power and a lot of the sort of creative potential that play has. I think there are games that are approaching it now, but I see a kind of, when I look at it from both perspectives, I see that there are lots of games that are making really, really interesting learning statements that are involved in lots of interesting explorations of educational potential, but then I don't see in a large way the connection that's having with the actual school system. And I worry that that's going to create a really big gap between the people who are producing this kind of work and the audience that most needs it.
Okay, can I ask a couple follow-up questions? So can you give some examples of when you say that games teach lots of interesting things all the time? What are some of those things? And which of those things do you think come from games, the games themselves, versus maybe something about the content?
Well, I'm going to riff directly off of Jim G here, so forgive me. If people are unfamiliar with it, the name of the book is What Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy. Games are about exploration, and they're about discovery. And all successful games involve learning of some kind, if it's just learning a system. But I think there's meta-skill acquisition that goes on there where you have to explore an unfamiliar space, you have to learn the rules that govern that space, and you have to learn to creatively apply those rules, which I think is an incredibly important kind of life learning. And I think that that's exactly the kind of thing that the testing structures that are generally used in pre-collegiate education do not explore. So any game that I could point to, from a game like God of War to a game like Civ to even like very simple casual games, can find ways to get people to explore their spaces. And I think the act of that exploration, which to me mirrors a kind of scientific process, is something that can train certain kinds of thought. And I think they do all the time. And I think you see that in the rapidity which with young people can pick up new games, and learn new systems. But I don't think that we're measuring that, because I can't say that anything more than anecdotally. And so I think the things that's one of the places where I think the things we're measuring and the things we're teaching are going in different directions.
Okay, and one thing I would add to that is the way we're measuring is also maybe not appropriate for capturing the kinds of things that maybe we see games doing. So we're going to come back to this assessment question because it's a big one. Everyone wants to know in a quantitative way how you can prove what somebody maybe has learned from a game that you've designed that you've called educational. And it's a very interesting issue to think about. How do we begin to, again, capture what it is that someone might have learned from the play of any particular kind of system, and what are the methods that those methods of assessment that have traditionally been used, and what are new methods that games are actually beginning to kind of propose. So I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, and Ken probably can speak to this some as well, but